Trevor Henderson walked into that boardroom, believing the world had finally bent in his favor. The deal was secured, the promotion was whispered, and the woman on his arm, young, polished, admiring, made him feel untouchable. He didn't notice the way the room went quiet when the doors closed behind him, didn't question why the executives avoided his eyes, didn't wonder why the head chair at the table remained empty. Because when a man believes he's won, he stops looking for danger. What Trevor didn't know was this. The person about to decide his future wasn't impressed by his confidence, wasn't fooled by his charm, and had been watching him for much longer than he realized. And by the time the truth surfaced, there would be no apology large enough, no explanation clever enough, and no exit quiet enough to save him. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. How does a man rise for 20 years only to fall in a single afternoon? Why would someone invite their greatest mistake into the very room where power is decided? And what kind of woman waits patiently, silently, until the moment a man exposes himself? This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about arrogance, mistaken for strength, and silence mistaken for weakness. Stay with me, because every seat at that table mattered, and every secret had a cost. This is the story of Claire Washington, a woman who spent 2 decades building credibility while her husband built excuses. This is about what happens when someone mistakes your quiet for permission, when they confuse your patience for ignorance, and when they finally realize that the person they underestimated the most was the one who held all the cards from the beginning. Trevor Henderson did not begin as a villain. He began as a hungry man. Raised in Columbus, Ohio, he learned early that respect followed success. His father worked in a factory for 40 years and died 6 months after retiring. Trevor absorbed that lesson. Work hard, climb high. Don't stop until people remember your name. He studied engineering at Ohio State, graduated with honors, got hired by a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in industrial infrastructure, water treatment plants, power grids, municipal contracts worth millions. Trevor was good at his job, better than good. He understood systems, could explain complex technical concepts to city council members who barely understood the problems they were trying to solve. He had a gift for making complicated things sound simple, for making nervous clients feel confident. By 30, he was promoted to senior consultant. By 35, he was leading teams. By 40, he was a partner, Henderson and Associates. His name on the door, his signature on contracts that employed hundreds of people. At home, however, success had grown quieter. His wife, Claire, no longer celebrated promotions the way she used to. She'd been there from the beginning. They'd met in college. She was studying civil engineering too. They'd worked on projects together, late nights in the library, shared ambitions, shared dreams. They married young, 24, optimistic, believing that 2 people working toward the same goals would naturally build something strong together. But careers, as it turns out, don't always move in parallel. Claire got pregnant at 26. Their daughter, Jasmine, beautiful, healthy, demanding in the way all newborns are. Claire took maternity leave, 6 weeks, then 12. Then she realized that going back full-time meant leaving Jasmine with strangers for 10 hours a day. Daycare cost almost as much as her salary. The math didn't work. So she made a choice. She'd take contract work, part-time consulting, projects she could do from home. It wasn't what she'd planned, but it was practical, temporary, she told herself, just until Jasmine started school. Temporary became 5 years, then 10, then 15. Claire kept working, but her career became a background hum while Trevor's became the main melody. He traveled. She stayed home. He networked. She managed school pickups. He closed deals. She made sure there was dinner on the table when he finally came home, and slowly, imperceptibly, the balance between them shifted. Not violently, not dramatically, just steadily, like erosion. Trevor stopped asking about her projects, stopped remembering the names of her clients, stopped noticing when she stayed up late finishing work after Jasmine went to bed. He wasn't cruel. He was just absent, present, physically, gone, emotionally. Claire noticed. Of course she noticed, but she told herself it was normal. that all marriages went through phases, that success required sacrifice, that once things settled, they'd reconnect. She was patient in a way that people mistake for acceptance. But patience isn't the same as permission. And Claire was paying attention. She saw the late nights that didn't match the project timelines, the business trips that extended for reasons that didn't quite add up, the way Trevor started dressing differently, cologne she didn't recognize, shirts she didn't buy. She didn't confront him. Not yet, because she needed to be sure, and because part of her didn't want to know. Then came Amber Cole, 29 years old, marketing coordinator at a firm Trevor's company had hired for a rebranding project. Ambitious, polished, the kind of woman who laughed at every joke and made eye contact that lasted a beat too long. Trevor convinced himself it was harmless. She admired him, asked his advice, made him feel like the version of himself he remembered from 20 years ago. Young, sharp, capable. He didn't mean for it to become more. At least that's what he told himself. But intention doesn't matter when actions speak louder. Lunch meetings became dinners. Work emails became texts. Professional boundaries became suggestions. And Trevor, who prided himself on discipline and control, convinced himself he was still in control, that this was just attention, just appreciation, just a reminder that he was still the man he'd worked so hard to become. He was 52 years old, and he was lying to himself. Claire found out by accident, or maybe not by accident. Maybe she'd been looking without admitting she was looking. Trevor left his laptop open one night. He'd gone upstairs. She was cleaning up the kitchen. She walked past his desk, saw the screen, an email. From Amber, nothing explicit, but the tone was wrong, familiar, intimate, too comfortable. Claire didn't confront him that night. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't pack bags. She just closed the laptop, went upstairs, got into bed, and lay there in the dark thinking, not about what she'd lost, but about what she'd been building quietly, carefully, for the past 5 years. Because while Trevor had been focused on his career, his title, his reputation, Claire had been doing something he'd stopped noticing. She'd been building her own. 5 years earlier, Claire had been offered a consulting opportunity she almost turned down, a small infrastructure firm called Meridian Industries. They needed someone with her background to advise on municipal water projects, part-time, flexible, perfect for someone balancing family obligations. Claire said yes. She worked quietly, no fanfare, no announcements. She advised on projects, solved problems, built relationships, and somewhere along the way, the founder of Meridian, a man named Gerald Foster, started asking her opinion on more than just technical issues: strategy, hiring, long-term planning. Claire was good at this, better than she'd realized, because while Trevor had spent 20 years perfecting the performance of competence, Claire had spent 20 years actually being competent. She understood systems, people, politics, how to build consensus without demanding credit, how to solve problems without creating new ones. Gerald noticed. When he started talking about succession planning 3 years ago, he didn't look outside the company. He looked at Claire. "I want you to consider something," Gerald had said. "I'm retiring in 2 years. The board needs continuity. You understand this company better than anyone. Would you consider a leadership role?" Claire had been stunned. "I'm part-time." "You're part-time in title," Gerald said, "but you've been essential for years. I'm not offering you a favor. I'm offering you what you've earned." Claire didn't tell Trevor. Not at first. She wanted to think about it, to make sure it wasn't just flattery, to understand what it would actually mean. She attended board meetings, quietly, observed, asked questions, learned the business side of the business, finance, legal, regulatory, the parts of infrastructure work that weren't just about engineering, but about relationships and risk and reputation. When Gerald officially retired 18 months ago, the board voted unanimously. Claire Washington, Chief Executive Officer, Meridian Industries. She told Trevor over dinner, casual, like it was no big thing. "I've been offered the CEO position at Meridian." Trevor had looked up from his plate. Surprised. "Really? That's great. Congratulations." He'd smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes, because for the first time in 20 years, Claire had something he didn't, a title that mattered, recognition that wasn't tied to his name. And Trevor, who'd spent 2 decades as the successful one, the important one, didn't know how to be proud of her without feeling diminished himself. So he did what people do when they're uncomfortable. He minimized it. It's a small company, right? Regional contracts? Mid-sized, Claire corrected. We manage projects in 8 states. Still, it's not the same as national work. Claire didn't argue. She just nodded and went back to her dinner. But she remembered that moment, remembered the way he'd needed to make her success smaller so his could stay larger. And she filed it away, the way she'd been filing things away for years. The Meridian Industries contract came up 6 months after Claire became CEO. It was significant, a municipal water infrastructure project in partnership with the state, worth $40 million over 5 years. Multiple firms would bid. Henderson and Associates was one of them. Trevor was leading the pitch. He'd spent months preparing. This was the kind of contract that defined careers, that elevated firms from regional to national, that opened doors to even bigger opportunities. He was confident. Why wouldn't he be? He had experience, relationships, a track record, and he genuinely believed Meridian would see him as the obvious choice. He didn't know that Claire had recused herself from the selection process, that she'd told the board she had a conflict of interest, that the decision would be made by a committee of executives and board members who had no personal connection to her husband. But she also didn't stop the process, didn't warn him, didn't suggest he pursue other opportunities. She let it play out, wanted to see what he'd do, how he'd handle himself, whether he'd approach this like a professional or like someone who believed he was owed something because of who he was married to. Trevor made his first mistake 3 weeks before the presentation. He started bringing Amber to client meetings, not as an official representative of his firm, but as someone he introduced vaguely. Amber's been helping with marketing strategy. It wasn't technically wrong, but it wasn't technically right either, because Amber wasn't on his team, wasn't contracted by his firm. She was someone he wanted close, someone who made him feel important, someone who laughed at his jokes and hung on his words and reminded him that he was still impressive. Claire heard about it. Not from Trevor. From a colleague at Meridian. A casual mention. Saw your husband at the pre-bid conference. He brought a young woman with him. Marketing consultant. Claire had smiled, said nothing, filed it away. The week before the final presentation, Trevor told Claire he'd be staying late at the office several nights, rehearsing, fine-tuning the pitch, making sure everything was perfect. Claire nodded. Good luck. But she didn't ask questions, didn't offer encouragement, didn't do any of the things she used to do when he had big presentations. Because she was done performing interest in work he'd stopped caring about when it came to hers. The day of the presentation arrived. Trevor woke up early, showered, put on his best suit, navy, tailored. The tie Claire had bought him for his 50th birthday. He looked at himself in the mirror, practiced his opening lines. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Confident, controlled. He was ready. He picked up Amber at 9. She'd offered to come to the presentation. For support. He'd said yes, without thinking about how it would look, without considering the optics, without asking himself whether bringing someone who wasn't part of his team to a high-stakes meeting was appropriate. Because Trevor had stopped asking himself hard questions years ago. He'd surrounded himself with people who agreed with him, who affirmed him, who made him feel like every decision he made was the right one. Amber was wearing a dress, elegant, professional, but also noticeable. Trevor told himself it didn't matter, that her presence wasn't about her, it was about him, about showing the room that he was the kind of person people wanted to be around. That success attracted success. That confidence was contagious. They arrived at the Meridian building at 10:30. The presentation was scheduled for 11. The building was modern, glass, steel, 40 floors. Trevor had been here once before, for a preliminary meeting. He remembered it feeling corporate, impressive, but not intimidating. Today felt different. The lobby was quieter, the receptionist more formal, the elevator ride longer. Amber squeezed his arm. You're going to kill this. Trevor smiled. I know. They reached the 40th floor. A conference room had been reserved. Large. Windows overlooking the city. A table long enough to seat 20 people. Trevor walked in first. Executives were already there, 7 of them, sitting, waiting. They stood when Trevor entered, polite nods, handshakes, professional. But something felt off. The energy was wrong, too controlled, too measured. Trevor introduced Amber. This is Amber Cole. She's been consulting with us on strategic positioning. One of the executives, a woman named Sharon, raised an eyebrow. She's part of your firm? She's worked with us on several projects, Trevor said, which wasn't a lie, but wasn't quite the truth either. Sharon nodded, made a note, didn't pursue it. Trevor set up his presentation. Slides, charts, projections. He'd done this 1,000 times. He was good at this. He glanced at the head of the table. Empty. Is the CEO joining us? He asked. She'll be here, Sharon said. Trevor nodded. Waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then the door opened. Not dramatically, not loudly, just deliberately. A woman entered. Tailored charcoal suit, no jewelry except a simple watch. Hair pulled back. Professional. Unremarkable in the way powerful people often are, because they don't need to announce themselves. The room stood. Trevor remained seated, because he didn't recognize her. And that was his final mistake. The woman walked to the head of the table. Saturday folded her hands, looked directly at him. Mr. Henderson, thank you for coming today. Her voice was calm, measured, familiar. Trevor's stomach dropped, because he knew that voice. He'd heard it every morning for 23 years. It was Claire, his wife, sitting at the head of the table as the CEO of the company he was pitching to, and he hadn't known, hadn't asked, hadn't paid attention, because for 2 decades he'd stopped seeing Claire as anything other than the person who existed in the background of his success. And now she was sitting in the one chair that mattered most, and there was no smile, no warmth, no acknowledgement that they knew each other. Just professionalism, just power, just the quiet, devastating realization that he'd walked into a room he didn't understand, with a woman he shouldn't have brought, to pitch a deal to the one person who knew exactly who he really was. Trevor's mouth went dry. He looked at Claire, at the executives, at Amber, who suddenly looked very small sitting beside him. No one said anything. The silence was suffocating. Claire spoke first. Mr. Henderson, we're ready for your presentation. Her tone was polite, distant, professional, as if they'd never met. Trevor cleared his throat. I wasn't aware you were. The CEO, Claire finished. It's been 18 months, but I understand you've been busy. The words landed like stones. Trevor glanced at Amber. She was staring at Claire, then at him, realization dawning. This is your wife? Amber whispered. Trevor didn't answer. Claire turned to Amber. And you are? Amber opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Trevor. Amber Cole? Trevor said quickly. She's a marketing consultant. She's been helping with strategic positioning for this pitch. I see, Claire said. She made a note. And is Miss Cole employed by Henderson and Associates? She's an independent contractor, Trevor said. We've worked together on several projects. Is she contracted for this specific project? Claire asked. Trevor hesitated. Not officially, but she's been invaluable in helping us refine our approach. Claire nodded slowly, looked at Sharon, then back at Trevor. Mr. Henderson, our policy requires all personnel involved in contract proposals to be disclosed in advance, for transparency. Was Miss Cole's involvement disclosed in your preliminary filings? Trevor felt sweat forming on his back. I didn't think it was necessary. She's not presenting. She's just here for support. Support, Claire repeated. She leaned back in her chair. I see. The room was silent. Trevor could feel the other executives watching, judging. He'd walked into this meeting confident, in control. Now he felt like a student called to the principal's office. Should we proceed with the presentation? Sharon asked Claire. Claire nodded. Please. Trevor stood. His hands were shaking. He hated that Claire could see it, that everyone could see it. He opened his slide deck, started talking, but the words felt wrong, hollow. He'd practiced this presentation for weeks. He knew every slide, every data point, every argument. But now, standing in front of Claire, in front of people who were looking at him differently, knowing that Amber's presence had already raised questions, he felt exposed, like someone had pulled back a curtain and revealed that he wasn't as competent as he'd convinced everyone he was. He talked about Henderson and Associates' track record, 20 years of successful projects, hundreds of millions in contracts, satisfied clients, on-time delivery, under budget, all true, all verifiable, but also performed. Because Trevor had spent his career perfecting the performance of expertise, he was good at sounding confident, at making complex things sound manageable, at reassuring clients that he had everything under control. But standing here, in front of his wife, he realized something. Claire knew the difference between performance and competence, because she'd lived with both versions of him, the man he was at work and the man he was at home, and she knew which one was real. Trevor finished his presentation. 30 minutes. Charts, projections, cost analysis, risk mitigation, everything a client should want to hear. He sat down, waited. Claire looked at the other executives. Questions? Sharon spoke first. Mr. Henderson, can you walk us through your subcontractor relationships? Specifically, how you ensure quality control when you're working with third-party vendors? Trevor answered, confidently. He knew this. This was solid ground. Another executive asked about timeline. Trevor answered. Another about regulatory compliance. Trevor answered. He was getting his rhythm back, remembering that he was good at this, that he'd done this successfully for 20 years. That one awkward moment didn't erase 2 decades of credibility. Then Claire spoke. Mr. Henderson, I have a question about your firm's conflict of interest policy. Trevor's heart sank. Of course. Specifically, Claire continued, how does your firm handle situations where personal relationships might influence professional decisions? The room went still. Trevor knew exactly what she was asking, and he knew everyone else in the room knew too. We have strict policies, Trevor said carefully. All potential conflicts are disclosed to clients. Relationships are documented, and we ensure that business decisions are made based on merit, not personal connections. That's reassuring, Claire said. And in this case, was your relationship with Missy Cole disclosed to us? Trevor felt his face flush. As I mentioned, Miss Cole is an independent contractor. She's not part of the firm. She's not part of this proposal. But she's here, Claire said, in this room, at this meeting, as your guest. So, I'm asking again, was her relationship with you disclosed? Trevor couldn't answer, because the truth was no. He hadn't disclosed it, because he didn't think he needed to, because he'd convinced himself that Amber's presence was innocent, that it was just support, just optics, just a reminder to himself that he was still impressive. But sitting here now, with Claire staring at him, with executives taking notes, with Amber shrinking in her chair, he understood. He'd brought his mistress to a business meeting, to impress her, to show off, to prove to himself that he was still the man he used to be, and in doing so, he'd revealed exactly who he'd become. No, Trevor said finally. I didn't disclose it. Claire nodded. Thank you for your honesty. She looked at Sharon, then back at Trevor. Mr. Henderson, we appreciate you taking the time to present today. We'll review all proposals and make a decision within 2 weeks. You'll be notified regardless of the outcome. It was a dismissal. Polite, professional, final. Trevor stood, gathered his materials. Amber was already at the door. She didn't look at anyone, didn't say goodbye, just left. Trevor followed. The elevator ride down was silent. Amber stared at the floor. Trevor stared at the numbers. 40, 39, 38. When they reached the lobby, Amber finally spoke. That was your wife. Yes, you didn't tell me. I didn't think it mattered. Amber laughed. Not a happy laugh, a bitter one. You didn't think it mattered that the CEO of the company you're pitching to is your wife? And you brought me? I didn't know she was the CEO, Trevor said. I didn't know she'd be there. You didn't ask, Amber said. You didn't ask because you don't pay attention to anyone but yourself. She walked away, left him standing in the lobby, alone, and for the first time in years, Trevor felt something he hadn't felt since he was young. Shame. Trevor went home. The house was empty. Claire wasn't there. Jasmine was at college, 3 states away. He sat in the living room, in the dark, replaying the meeting in his head, trying to figure out where it had gone wrong, trying to convince himself it wasn't as bad as it felt. But he knew. He knew the moment Claire had asked about conflicts of interest. The moment she'd looked at him with that calm, controlled expression. The expression that said she knew about Amber, knew about the lunches, the texts, the late nights. She'd known for months, maybe years, and she hadn't said anything, hadn't confronted him, hadn't screamed or cried or demanded explanations. She'd just watched, waited, and when the moment came, when he'd handed her the perfect opportunity to expose him, she'd taken it, not vindictively, not cruelly, just professionally, just by asking the questions any CEO should ask, about transparency, about conflicts of interest, about whether the people presenting to her could be trusted. And Trevor had failed every test. Claire came home at 8. She walked in, set down her bag, looked at Trevor sitting in the dark. "We need to talk," Trevor said. "Yes," Claire agreed. "We do." She sat across from him, not beside him, across, like they were negotiating. "How long have you known?" Trevor asked. "About Amber?" 8 months. Trevor closed his eyes. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to see what you'd do," Claire said. "Whether you'd end it, whether you'd come clean, whether you'd realize on your own that you were risking everything. And you didn't," Claire said. "You brought her to the most important meeting of your career. You introduced her to my colleagues. You put her in a room where decisions about millions of dollars were being made. Not because she added value, but because you wanted her there, because it made you feel good." Trevor didn't argue, because she was right. "The board is going to vote on the contract next week," Claire said. "You won't get it. Because of today? Because you didn't earn it," Claire said. "Your proposal was fine, competent, but there were 3 other firms, all equally qualified. And when it came down to deciding who to trust with $40 million, who demonstrated integrity, who showed respect for process, you failed. Because I brought Amber. Because you brought Amber," Claire confirmed. "And because when I asked you about conflicts of interest, you hesitated. You tried to minimize. You didn't take responsibility. And that told me everything I needed to know." Trevor felt anger rising, not at Claire, at himself, but also at her, for setting him up, for letting him walk into that room, for not warning him. "You could have told me you were the CEO," Trevor said. "I told you 18 months ago," Claire replied. "You congratulated me. Then you never asked about it again. You didn't ask what the company does, who we work with, what projects we manage. You didn't care, because it wasn't about you." Trevor wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because she was right. He hadn't cared, hadn't asked, hadn't paid attention, because Claire's career had always been background noise, something that happened while he was busy with his own success. "I'm sorry," Trevor said. "For Amber, for not telling you, for all of it." "I know you are," Claire said, "but sorry doesn't fix this." "What do you want?" Trevor asked. "I want a divorce," Claire said. The words hung in the air. Trevor had known, on some level, but hearing it said out loud made it real. "Claire, I've already contacted an attorney," she said. "I'm not angry. I'm not trying to punish you. I just don't want to be married to someone who sees me as an accessory to his life instead of a partner in it. I never saw you that way." "Yes, you did," Claire said. "For 20 years, you saw me as the person who made your life easier, who took care of things so you didn't have to, who stayed quiet so you could be loud. And I let you, because I thought that's what partnership meant. But it's not. Partnership means seeing each other. And you stopped seeing me a long time ago." Trevor didn't know what to say, because everything she was saying was true, and he hadn't realized it until it was too late. "Can we try?" he asked. "Can we go to counseling? Can we—" "No," Claire said, "because I don't want to. I spent 20 years making our marriage work, making excuses for you, convincing myself that your absence was temporary, that once you achieved enough, you'd come back. But you never did, and I'm done waiting." She stood. "You can stay here tonight, but I'd like you to find somewhere else to stay starting tomorrow. I'll have my attorney send over the paperwork. We can handle this quietly, professionally, like adults." She walked upstairs, left him sitting in the dark, and Trevor understood, finally, that he'd lost. Not just the contract, not just Amber, but the one person who'd believed in him before anyone else did. And he'd lost her because he'd stopped believing in her. Meridian Industries awarded the contract to a smaller firm, not Henderson and Associates. The decision was announced 2 weeks later. Professional, respectful, no explanation required. Trevor's firm survived, but his reputation didn't. Word spread, not loudly, not dramatically, just the way these things do in professional circles. Trevor Henderson brought his girlfriend to a pitch meeting with his wife's company. He didn't get the contract. People talked. Some felt bad for him, some didn't. Most just filed it away as a cautionary tale about what happens when you stop paying attention, when you take people for granted, when you confuse confidence with competence. Trevor moved out, found an apartment, smaller, quieter. He tried to focus on work, but it was harder now, because every meeting felt different. Every pitch felt hollow. He'd spent 20 years believing he was good at this, and he was, but he'd also spent 20 years believing his success was his alone, that he'd earned everything through his own effort. And now, sitting alone in an apartment that smelled like someone else's life, he realized how wrong he'd been. Claire didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, didn't tell people what had happened. She just moved forward, focused on her work, on building Meridian into something even stronger, on proving that the board's decision to make her CEO had been the right one. She was good at her job, better than good. Because while Trevor had spent 20 years perfecting the performance of competence, Claire had spent 20 years actually being competent, understanding systems, building relationships, solving problems, earning trust. She didn't need to announce it, didn't need validation, didn't need anyone to tell her she was impressive. She just knew, and that knowledge was enough. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Claire ran into Trevor at a professional conference. He looked thinner, older. He tried to smile. "Claire." "Hi, Trevor. How have you been?" "Good," Claire said. "Busy. You?" "Same." Silence. Awkward, painful. "I'm sorry," Trevor said, "for everything. I know I said it before, but I mean it." "I know you do," Claire said, "but it doesn't change anything." "I know." Trevor hesitated. "Do you ever think about—" "I don't know. Whether we could have fixed it?" Claire considered. "No. No. Because fixing it would have required you to see the problem, and you never did. Not until it was too late. And by then, I'd already moved on." Trevor nodded. "You're doing well, I've heard." "I'm doing my job," Claire said. "That's all." "It's more than that," Trevor said. "You're good at it. You always were. I just didn't notice." "No," Claire agreed. "You didn't." She looked at him, really looked, and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just distance. "Take care of yourself, Trevor." She walked away, and Trevor watched her go, and understood, finally, that some things, once broken, don't get fixed. They just end. And the only thing you can do is learn from it, and try, if you're lucky enough to get another chance, to do better next time. Trevor never got another chance with Claire, but he did learn. Not quickly, not easily, but slowly. Over years, he learned to pay attention, to ask questions, to see the people around him as more than supporting characters in his own story. He learned that success means nothing if you're building it alone, that titles and contracts and recognition are hollow if there's no one you care about to share them with. And he learned that the people you take for granted are often the ones holding everything together, and when they let go, everything falls. 5 years after the divorce, Trevor received an invitation. Meridian Industries was hosting an industry gala, recognizing leadership in infrastructure development. Claire was being honored. He almost didn't go. But something made him. Curiosity, maybe. Or guilt. Or just the need to see her one more time. The event was elegant, professional. Claire stood at the podium accepting her award. She thanked her team, her board, her colleagues. She didn't mention Trevor, not once. And he understood. She'd moved on. Completely. After the ceremony, Trevor approached her. "Congratulations, you deserve it." "Thank you," Claire said. She wasn't cold, just polite. Distant. "Jasmine tells me you've been seeing someone," Trevor said. "I have," Claire confirmed. "He's nice. He asks about my work." Trevor smiled. "Bitter. Good. That's good." "It is," Claire said. And then she added, "I hope you find someone who makes you feel like you matter, like you're more than just what you do." "Did I make you feel that way?" Trevor asked. "Once?" Claire said. "A long time ago." She walked away, and Trevor stood in that ballroom, surrounded by successful people, impressive achievements, expensive suits and polite smiles. And he felt more alone than he ever had, because he'd spent his whole life chasing success, and he'd caught it. But in the process, he'd lost the only person who made it mean something. So, what can we learn from Trevor and Claire's story? Because this isn't just about one man's mistake. This is about patterns, about values, about understanding what actually matters before it's too late. If you're in a relationship right now, whether you're married or dating or partnered in any way, here's what you need to understand. Success means nothing if you're building it alone. Trevor spent 20 years chasing titles and contracts and recognition, and he achieved all of it. But he did it by taking Claire for granted, by assuming she'd always be there, by treating her contribution as background noise instead of the foundation it actually was. And when she finally had enough, when she chose herself over him, he lost everything that mattered. First lesson: pay attention to the people who support you, not just with words, with actions. Ask about their work, their goals, their challenges. Show up for them the way they show up for you. Because partnership isn't about one person succeeding while the other waits in the background. It's about both people building something together. And when one person stops contributing, when one person stops seeing the other as an equal, the partnership dies, even if the marriage survives. Second lesson: integrity isn't optional. Trevor brought Amber to that meeting because he wanted to feel important, to impress her, to prove to himself that he was still impressive. But in doing so, he violated every principle of professional conduct. He brought someone with a personal conflict of interest into a business setting. He failed to disclose relationships that should have been disclosed. He prioritized his ego over his ethics. And when Claire asked him about it, when she gave him the opportunity to take responsibility, he minimized. He deflected. He tried to explain it away. And that's when she knew, that's when everyone in that room knew, that he couldn't be trusted. Because integrity isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when you think no one will notice. And Trevor had spent years making choices that looked fine on the surface, but were hollow underneath. And eventually, hollowness collapses. Third lesson: transparency builds trust. Secrets destroy it. Claire knew about Amber for 8 months before that meeting. She didn't confront Trevor. She waited, because she wanted to see what he'd do, whether he'd come clean, whether he'd end it, whether he'd choose his marriage over his ego. He didn't. And that silence, that choice to hide rather than confess, killed whatever trust remained. If you're keeping secrets from your partner, ask yourself why. If the answer is because they wouldn't understand, or because it's not a big deal, or because you'll tell them eventually, you're lying to yourself. Secrets are kept because you know, on some level, that what you're doing is wrong, and the longer you keep them, the worse the damage becomes. Because trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild, not because people can't forgive, but because they can't forget. And every future interaction is filtered through the memory of being lied to. Fourth lesson: your career is not your identity. Trevor built his entire sense of self around his job, his title, his reputation, and when that started to crack, when Claire's career started to eclipse his, when he felt less important, he compensated. He found someone who made him feel impressive again. He doubled down on performance instead of addressing the insecurity underneath. But here's the truth: your job is what you do. It's not who you are. And if you only feel valuable when you're succeeding professionally, you'll never feel secure. Because success is temporary. Positions change, companies fail, contracts end. The only thing that lasts is who you are when the title is stripped away. And if there's nothing underneath, if you've built your entire identity on external validation, you'll spend your whole life chasing something that can never satisfy you. Fifth lesson: don't mistake patience for permission. Claire was patient. For 20 years, she made sacrifices, adjusted her career, took care of things so Trevor could focus on his. And Trevor mistook that patience for acceptance. He thought because she didn't complain, she didn't mind. Because she didn't demand attention, she didn't need it. Because she didn't fight back, she didn't notice. But patience isn't permission. It's a choice. And when that choice runs out, When the patient person finally says enough, there's no negotiating, no second chances, no going back, because they didn't leave on impulse. They left after years of consideration, after trying, after hoping, after realizing that nothing was going to change. So, if someone in your life is patient with you, don't mistake that for weakness. Don't assume you can keep taking without giving. Don't wait until they're gone to appreciate what they were doing all along. Sixth lesson: success requires seeing people clearly, not as you want them to be, not as they used to be, but as they are. Trevor stopped seeing Claire years before the divorce. He saw the version of her he'd constructed, the supportive wife, the background presence, the person who existed to make his life easier. He didn't see the engineer, the consultant, the CEO, the woman who was building something significant while he was busy being impressed with himself. And because he didn't see her, he lost her. Not to another man, not to circumstances. He lost her to his own blindness. Pay attention to the people in your life. Really pay attention, not just to what they say, but to what they do, what they need, what they're building, who they're becoming. Because people grow. And if you're not growing with them, if you're not noticing the ways they're changing, you'll wake up one day next to a stranger. And it won't be their fault. It'll be yours. Seventh lesson: professionalism matters everywhere. Trevor thought he could separate his personal life from his professional life. That what he did at home didn't affect what he did at work. But that's not how life works. Character is character. Integrity is integrity. If you're dishonest in your marriage, you'll be dishonest in business. If you take shortcuts in relationships, you'll take shortcuts in contracts. If you prioritize ego over ethics at home, you'll do the same at work. Professionalism isn't a mask you put on for clients. It's a way of being. It's how you treat people when they can't do anything for you, when they're not watching, when it doesn't benefit you. And when Trevor brought Amber to that meeting, when he failed to disclose their relationship, when he tried to minimize it instead of owning it, he revealed who he really was, not just to Claire, but to everyone in that room. And once people see that, once they understand that your word can't be trusted, that your judgment is compromised, that your priorities are self-serving, you can't unshow them that. The reputation you spent years building can be destroyed in a single afternoon, and rebuilding it, if it's even possible, takes decades. Eighth lesson: know when to let go. Claire could have stayed. She could have demanded counseling, could have fought for the marriage, could have given Trevor another chance, but she didn't, because she recognized something crucial. Some things aren't worth saving, not because they're broken beyond repair, but because the cost of repair is too high. Claire had already spent 20 years trying, 20 years adjusting, 20 years hoping Trevor would notice, would change, would see her, and he didn't. So when the moment came, when he handed her irrefutable proof that nothing had changed, she made a choice. She chose herself. And that's not selfish. That's self-respect. Knowing when to let go isn't giving up. It's recognizing that you've already given enough. That you're allowed to stop carrying someone who refuses to walk beside you. That you deserve a relationship where you're not constantly waiting for someone to show up. If you're in a relationship where you're the only one trying, where you're making all the compromises, where you're constantly hoping the other person will change, ask yourself this: how long are you willing to wait? And what are you sacrificing while you're waiting? Because life is short, and the years you spend waiting for someone to become who you need them to be are years you can't get back. Ninth lesson: your actions teach people how to treat you. Trevor treated Claire like she was secondary, optional, forgettable, and she let him, for years, because she believed that patience and sacrifice would eventually be recognized. That love meant enduring. That partnership meant one person leading while the other followed. But her patience taught Trevor that he could take her for granted, that he didn't need to ask about her work, that he didn't need to show up for her the way she showed up for him, that she'd always be there, until she wasn't. Your actions teach people how to treat you. If you tolerate disrespect, people will disrespect you. If you accept being taken for granted, people will take you for granted. If you stay silent when you should speak, people will assume silence means consent. And changing that dynamic, once it's established, is almost impossible, because people resist change. They like the version of you that serves them. And when you start demanding more, when you start expecting reciprocity, when you start choosing yourself, they'll call you selfish. They'll say you've changed. They'll accuse you of being unreasonable. But the truth is, you're not being unreasonable. You're finally being honest about what you need, what you deserve, and what you're no longer willing to accept. Finally, the most important lesson. Some endings are necessary. Trevor and Claire's marriage didn't end because of Amber. It ended because Trevor had been absent for years. Because he'd stopped being a partner. Because he'd built a life where Claire was a supporting character instead of a co-author. Amber was just the final proof. The moment that made undeniable what had been true for a long time. The marriage was already over. They were just still living in the same house. And Claire's decision to end it, to file for divorce, to choose herself, wasn't a failure. It was a success. Because she recognized that staying in a relationship that diminished her was worse than being alone. That divorce wasn't giving up. It was letting go of something that was never going to work. Not all endings are tragedies. Some are liberations. Some are necessary closures. Some are the moment you finally stop waiting for someone else to change and you start changing your own circumstances. Claire didn't fail. She succeeded. She built a career, raised a daughter, earned respect. And when her marriage no longer served her, when it became clear that Trevor would never be the partner she needed, she walked away, with dignity, with clarity, with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth and refuses to settle for less. So what would you have done in Claire's position? Would you have confronted Trevor the moment you found out about Amber? Or would you have done what she did and waited to see what he'd do? Would you have warned him before the meeting? Or let him walk in blind? Would you have given him another chance after the divorce papers? Or would you have walked away and never looked back? These aren't easy questions, because relationships are complicated, because love doesn't disappear just because someone hurts you, because 20 years together means something, even if those years weren't what you hoped they'd be. But here's what I want you to think about. Claire didn't make her decision impulsively. She didn't leave because she was angry. She left because she was done, because she'd tried everything. Because she'd given Trevor every opportunity to see her, to choose her, to show up for her. And he didn't. Not because he was evil, not because he didn't love her, but because he loved himself more. Because his ego was more important than his marriage. Because his comfort was more important than her dignity. And when she finally understood that, when she finally accepted that nothing she did would change him, she made the hardest, bravest choice a person can make. She chose herself. If you're watching this, and something about this story resonates, if you see yourself in Claire or Trevor, if you recognize patterns in your own relationships, here's what I want you to do. Don't wait 20 years. Don't sacrifice decades hoping someone will notice. Don't make yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. If you're in a relationship where you're the only one trying, say something. Now. Not kindly, not patiently, clearly. Tell them what you need. What you're not getting, what has to change. And if they don't change, if they minimize your concerns, if they promise but don't deliver, leave. Not as punishment, not as revenge, but as self-preservation, because you deserve a relationship where you're seen, where you're valued, where your work matters, where your voice is heard, where partnership is real, not just a word. And if the person you're with can't give you that, someone else will, or you'll give it to yourself. And sometimes, that's even better. Comment below. Have you ever been in Claire's position? Have you ever waited for someone to see you, to choose you, to show up for you? What did you do? Did you stay or did you leave? And if you left, do you regret it? Or was it the best decision you ever made? Share your story, because every person who reads it might find the courage to make their own hard choice. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's waiting, someone who's hoping, someone who needs permission to choose themselves. Hit that like button, subscribe, because we're not done. There are more stories like this, more lessons, more truths that people need to hear. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself. Pay attention to the people who matter. And remember that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself. Everything else builds from there.